Some villages are cursed not by demons, but by silence. In the heart of rural Thailand, there is a place where no child cried for more than 10 years. No blessings. No births. Only a lullaby whispered in the dark. This is the story of a woman who died while still carrying her child, and the unborn soul that refused to disappear. What you are about to hear is not a legend meant to entertain. It is a story passed down in fear, spoken only at night, and never finished aloud. Chapter 1. The Village Without Newborns. No one could remember exactly when the village of Nong Kham first fell silent. At first, people believed it was nothing more than coincidence. 1 year passed without a newborn's cry. Then 2. Then 3. But by the 10th year, when not even the weak wail of a premature infant could be heard, the villagers were forced to admit what none of them dared to say aloud. Nong Kham was cursed. The village lay deep in the central Thai countryside, surrounded by dense forest and flooded rice fields. In the early mornings, mist wrapped itself around the old stilt houses like funeral shrouds. The single dirt road leading in and out was often swallowed by floodwater during the rainy season, cutting the village off from the outside world. People believed this isolation allowed wandering spirits to find Nong Kham and never leave. Women who became pregnant no longer celebrated. They hid their swelling bellies beneath loose clothing. No blessing ceremonies were held. No cradles were prepared. No baby clothes were sewn. Everyone understood the unspoken rule: the greater the hope, the deeper the grief. Some women miscarried in their 3rd month, blood soaking the wooden floors in the middle of the night. Others gave birth too early, their babies slipping into the world blue and silent, never drawing a first breath. There were stranger cases still, children who continued to move in the womb until the final moment, then suddenly stopped, as if they had never existed at all. No doctor stayed in Nong Kham for long. No midwife would accept another delivery. They claimed that whenever they placed a hand on a pregnant woman's belly in the village, they felt cold, a cold that did not belong to living flesh. At night, when the wind swept across the flooded fields, the villagers shut their doors and extinguished their lamps. No one dared to look toward the far end of the village, where a single abandoned stilt house stood, its wooden floor rotting, its pillars leaning as if ready to collapse. Because from there, on moonless nights, a lullaby could be heard. No one knew whether it was truly a woman's voice or merely the wind slipping through broken planks. But the melody repeated itself, slow, mournful, endlessly looping, like a mother rocking a child who would never fall asleep. Those who heard it all dreamed the same dream. They saw a woman standing with her back turned, her belly grotesquely swollen. Her hair was long, black, and wet, dripping onto the ground. When she turned around, no one ever saw her face, only her hands clutching her stomach, as if something inside was struggling to escape. The next morning, every one of them woke with a dull ache in their abdomen, men and women alike. And from that day on, no one in Nong Kham dared ask the question they already knew the answer to: why the village no longer had newborn children. Chapter 2. The woman who died while her womb still moved. Nong Chan died on a night of relentless rain. No one in Nong Kham ever forgot that night, because the rain did not fall like ordinary rain. The drops struck the roofs heavily, pounding against the wooden shingles like funeral drums. The wind screamed through the bamboo groves, snapping branches together with dry, cracking sounds, like bones breaking. Nong Chan was nearly full term. Her belly was stretched and heavy, dragging her body forward with every step. The child inside her was still alive. Everyone in the village knew this, because whenever she passed by, they could see her womb move clearly, as if a small hand inside was pressing outward. Yet no one helped her. Nong Chan was an unmarried woman. The man who had gotten her pregnant fled to Bangkok as soon as he learned the truth. In Nong Kham, a woman carrying a child without a husband was considered a bad omen. People whispered that a child born from sin would bring disaster. That night, when the first labor pains struck, Nong Chan knocked on every door in the village. No one opened. Some houses even blew out their lamps, pretending no one was inside. Her pleas grew weaker with each contraction. Her voice cracked, hoarse and broken, swallowed by the rain as if it had never existed. In the end, Nong Chan returned to her stilt house at the edge of the village. The house was small and decayed, its wooden floor so rotten that every step groaned in protest. She collapsed onto the floor, rainwater and sweat pooling beneath her body. She bit down hard to keep herself from screaming, her hands gripping her belly with desperate strength. People later said that her womb continued to move for hours after she collapsed. At dawn, when the rain finally eased, a child wandering near the rice fields noticed her door standing ajar. Inside, Nong Chan lay motionless. Her legs were spread, her skirt soaked in dark, dried blood. Her eyes were wide open, the whites clouded, staring up at the rafters as though she were watching something invisible to the living. Her hands were still wrapped tightly around her belly. No one dared touch her at first. When an old midwife finally placed a trembling hand on Nong Chan's abdomen, she screamed. Something inside was still moving, weak, sluggish, but undeniably real. Panic spread through the village. No doctor was called, no prayer was offered, no one dared cut open her body to save the child, for fear of touching something that no longer belonged to the world of the living. They did only one thing. They carried her body away as quickly as possible. The cremation was held in haste. Before the sun reached its peak, there were no sutras, no farewells. The fire was lit in silence. But as the flames began to consume her body, Nong Chan's belly swelled unnaturally. A sound rose from the funeral pyre. No one dared say what it was, but every single person there heard it. Chapter 3. The child who never had time to cry. No one in Nong Kham dared to look directly at the funeral pyre when the flames rose. Nong Chan's body lay at the center of the stacked firewood, wrapped carelessly in a white cloth already stained gray with ash and rain. There were no flowers, no incense, no chanting, only the sound of wind moving through the forest, and the damp, heavy smell of wet earth mixed with burning wood. The villagers believed that staring too long at a wrongful death allowed the dead to stare back. At first, the fire burned normally. Then something changed. The flames shifted color. They were no longer red or orange, but a pale, flickering blue, cold and unnatural, like ghost fire rising from a graveyard. The heat did not increase, yet everyone standing nearby felt a chill crawl up their spines, as if unseen fingers were brushing the backs of their necks. Then Nong Chan's belly began to move. Not the twitching of muscle reacting to heat. It rose and fell, slowly, rhythmically, like the breathing of something still alive. The white cloth stretched tight, darkened by fluid seeping from beneath it. A man screamed and dropped the torch from his hands. And then, a cry was heard. It was not loud. It was not sharp like the cry of a newborn. It was hoarse and broken, as if the throat that produced it had never drawn its first breath. The sound came from the center of the pyre, cutting through the crackling fire, piercing straight into every ear. Some villagers collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads. Others ran blindly into the darkness, slipping in mud, never looking back. An old woman fainted where she stood, her lips moving soundlessly as she tried to call the Buddha's name. No one dared extinguish the flames. The blue fire burned for an entire watch of the night, until nothing remained but blackened ash. But the crying did not stop immediately. It faded slowly, growing weaker, thinner, until it became nothing more than a stifled whimper, barely audible, as if someone were forcing it down. At dawn, Nong Chan's remains were gathered. Amid the ashes, something was found that should not have existed. A small, curled shape, blackened and hardened, resembling the form of an unfinished fetus. It had not burned to ash like the rest of the body, but remained intact, stiff as charred wood. No one dared touch it with bare hands. In the end, they used bamboo tongs to lift it into a red cloth bag, tied it shut, and buried it behind Nong Chan's stilt house, without a marker, without a prayer. From that day on, Nong Kham began to change. Livestock died without cause. The well water took on a metallic, bloody smell. Women woke screaming in the night, clutching their bellies, convinced that something was crawling inside them, even though they were not pregnant. And every night, from the far end of the village, the lullaby returned, clearer now. No longer distant like the wind, but close enough to sound as if it were being sung right behind you. Chapter 4. The Lullaby in the Night. The lullaby first appeared on the 7th night after the cremation. At the beginning, it was barely audible, so faint that anyone who did not wake in the middle of the night would have dismissed it as the wind slipping through broken floorboards, or water lapping against the rice fields. Yet those who heard it shared the same unsettling certainty. The song was not meant for the living. The melody was slow and repetitive, built from only a few simple phrases. The words were unclear, more like drawn-out sounds than language, whispered in a tired, hollow voice, as if it rose from a throat that had cried itself dry. The lullaby had no clear beginning and no end. It hung in the air, drifting from house to house, like someone standing just outside the door, rocking an unseen child. The first person to admit hearing it was Sanjay, a middle-aged woman who lived near the edge of the village. That night, she woke with a crushing sense of suffocation. The air inside her house felt thick and heavy, carrying a faint metallic smell, old blood mixed with sour milk. As she sat up, the lullaby became clearer, coming from the direction of Nong Chan's abandoned stilt house. Sanjay tried to recite a prayer, but her mind went blank. She could not remember a single verse in full. Her heart pounded, her thoughts slipping away as the song wrapped itself around her, dragging her eyelids down. When Sanjay fell asleep, she dreamed. She stood inside the decaying stilt house. The wooden floor was slick and wet, sticky beneath her feet. In front of her stood a woman with her back turned, long black hair hanging down her spine, dripping water onto the floor. Her belly was grotesquely swollen, stretched tight in an unnatural way. The lullaby played directly behind Sanjay's ear. The woman slowly turned around. There was no face, only a hollow darkness where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. From that darkness came the sound of breathing, thin and weak, and another noise, wet and rhythmic, like the sound of a child suckling. Sanjay woke screaming. The next morning, she was found dead in her bed. Her hands were pressed tightly against her abdomen. Her fingernails dug deep into her skin as if she had tried to tear something out from inside herself. Her mouth was twisted open, her throat filled with clotted blood, as though she had tried to scream but had never managed to let the sound escape. After that, no one denied the existence of the lullaby anymore. Anyone who heard it began to dream the same dream: a faceless woman with a swollen belly, a child that did not cry, and the overwhelming sensation that their own abdomen was growing heavier, even when their body showed no sign of pregnancy. The village children became strangely quiet. They drew unsettling pictures in the dirt, figures of women without faces, large swollen bellies, and long cords trailing down to the ground. Adults began locking their doors before sunset. But the lullaby still found its way inside. Because once you had heard it even once, you no longer needed ears to hear it. Chapter 5. Blood seeping from the floor. The first stain of blood appeared early one morning, while the mist still clung thickly to the rice fields. A man passing by Nong Chan's abandoned stilt house stopped suddenly, struck by a familiar stench. It was not the smell of mud or rotting animals. It was the unmistakable odor of old blood, the kind that lingered long after life had already left a body. He bent down. From the narrow gap between two rotting floorboards, a dark liquid seeped out. Slowly, heavily, one drop fell to the ground. Then another, then another. It did not flow like water, but dripped at a steady rhythm, like the beating of a heart. Word spread quickly through the village. By the time people gathered, the blood had pooled beneath the house. The wooden floor above was soaked through, stained a deep, almost black red, as though the blood had been trapped inside the wood for years and was only now finding a way out. No one stepped onto the floor. An old woman whispered that it was childbirth blood that had never been allowed to dry. From that day on, blood began to appear in places where blood had no right to be. Beneath the beds of village women, on sleeping mats, inside water jars drawn from the well. The amounts were small, but enough to spread terror, because the blood appeared without pattern or warning. The most horrifying cases involved pregnant women. Whenever they passed near Nong Chan's abandoned house, their bellies tightened instantly, as if a hand inside was squeezing them from within. Some collapsed to their knees in the mud, blood running down their legs, soaking into the wet earth. The fetuses died on the spot, without a single sign of distress beforehand. One night, a young woman miscarried inside her own home. The next morning, as her family cleaned the floor, they discovered tiny handprints, pressed into the wood beneath the house, formed entirely of blood, as though something small had crawled there, searching for a way out. From then on, villagers burned incense at their doorways every night. They hung talismans, tied red strings, and placed Buddha images in every corner of their homes. But the blood did not stop. Nong Chan's stilt house became the center of fear. By day, it stood silent and decaying, no different from any other abandoned structure. But at night, the floorboards began to make sounds, slow, deliberate creaks, as though someone heavy were pacing back and forth above, despite the absence of wind. Some villagers swore they had seen the figure of a woman standing beneath the house. Head bowed, both hands resting on her belly. Blood dripped steadily from between her legs, striking the ground one drop at a time. No one dared approach to confirm it. Because once the blood began to flow, everyone understood the truth. The curse no longer existed only in dreams. It had found a way into the world of the living. Chapter 6. The Old Midwife and the Warning. The old midwife's name was Fimala. She lived at the edge of the village, in a low wooden house half hidden by bamboo groves. No one knew her true age. People only knew that she had been there since Nong Kham was little more than a cluster of huts beside wild fields, long enough to deliver generations of children and to watch generations of villagers die. But for more than 10 years, no one had called for her. Because Nong Kham no longer had newborns. When blood began seeping from floors and women miscarried one after another, the villagers finally went to Fimala. They came late in the afternoon, when the sun was already fading, as though arriving earlier would expose their cowardice too clearly. Fimala was not surprised by what they told her. She sat silently, thin fingers twisting an old red thread. Her eyes stared into empty space. When Nong Chan's name was spoken, her hands froze, and the thread slipped from her grasp. "I warned you," she said at last, her voice rough and dry. But no one listened. Fimala told them that Nong Chan's death was not the worst part. The true horror was the child that died inside her womb, never having breathed, never having been named, never having been acknowledged as existing at all. A woman who dies while pregnant carries resentment heavier than any other ghost. Fimala said, but when the child dies unjustly with her, that resentment does not fade. It clings to the mother and twists her into something that is no longer human, and not an ordinary spirit either. She called it a ghost born from wrongful death in the womb, a soul trapped between two unfinished lives. In the old stories, this kind of spirit did not need blood to grow strong. It needed the hunger to be born. And to fill that hunger, it would seek out other women, other wombs. The villagers asked why charms and talismans did nothing. Fimala let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Charms drive away what comes from outside," she said, "but this thing, it is already inside." She told them that cremating Nong Chan while the child was still moving had been an unforgivable mistake. The fire had destroyed the last chance for the child to be born, while binding its soul permanently to the human world. "You created a mother without a child," Fimala said slowly, "and a child who was never allowed to exist." The air inside her house grew heavy. Someone asked if there was any way to end the curse. Fimala was silent for a long time. Then she shook her head. "To restore peace, you must do what you should have done from the beginning." She looked up at the pale, terrified faces around her. "You must find the child. You must give it a name. And you must accept it as part of this village." A man whispered. "And if we don't?" Fimala picked up the fallen red thread and wrapped it around her wrist. "Then Nong Kham will never have children again." When the villagers left, night had already fallen. And that night, the lullaby rose louder than ever before, not sorrowful now, but urgent and restless, as if something had finally realized it was about to be acknowledged, or rejected forever. Chapter 7. The Child in the Earthen Jar. No one slept the night after the old midwife's warning. The lullaby no longer drifted from afar. It lingered inside the village itself, clinging to the air like breath. Whenever someone closed their eyes, the melody surfaced inside their head, so clear that it became impossible to tell where waking ended and dreaming began. Before dawn, A few of the men decided to do what they had avoided for years. They went to Nong Chan's stilt house. The ground beneath it was soft from the rain, mud sinking around their ankles. A heavy, metallic stench rose as they approached, thick enough to sting the back of the throat. Above them, the floorboards groaned weakly, as if protesting what was about to happen. One man struck the ground with his hoe. The sound was wrong. Not the dull thud of earth, but the hollow knock of metal against something solid. They dug deeper. After only a few strikes, the rim of an old earthen jar emerged. It had been sealed with dried mud, wrapped tightly with strips of red cloth so decayed they nearly blended into the soil. None of the men remembered placing it there. Yet all of them knew what it was. As the jar was lifted from the ground, a violent wind swept through the clearing. Trees bent and leaves clashed together, sounding like hundreds of whispering mouths. The lullaby rose sharply, breaking apart, like a cry being strangled mid-note. No one wanted to open the jar, but it was already out of the earth. The lid was wrenched off with a single, desperate motion. A wave of stench poured out, rot mixed with burned ash, forcing several men to gag. Inside was a small, twisted form. It was no longer flesh, not quite bone. The thing was dried and blackened, its limbs drawn tight against its body, like a fetus burned and forgotten. Its skin was cracked like charred wood, but its shape was unmistakable. Head, arms, legs, all still there. Wrapped around it was a strip of red cloth, darkened and fused to the body like a second skin. And the most horrifying detail of all, the umbilical cord was still there. It stretched from the small body and clung to the bottom of the jar, as though the child had never truly been severed from where it belonged. The moment light touched it, a sound emerged. Not a cry, but a faint, wheezing breath, like air scraping through a dried throat. The jar trembled slightly in the man's hands, as if something inside had just shifted. One of the men dropped the jar. At that instant, from inside the stilt house above them, came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, dragging, step by step, like a woman with a heavy womb moving across rotting floorboards. No one dared look up. They knew that if they did, they would see Nong Chan standing there, both hands clutching an empty belly. Her head bowed, her eyes no longer belonging to the living. They hastily sealed the jar again, burying it deeper than before, their hands shaking too badly to tie the red cloth properly. But as the final layer of soil was packed down, every one of them felt the same cold certainty. Whatever lay beneath did not want to be buried anymore. That night, the entire village heard a child crying. For the first time. And no one in Nong Kham dared ask the question that followed. Where that child was crying from. Chapter 8. The New Pregnant Woman. Molly arrived in Nong Kham on a gloomy afternoon, when the clouds hung so low it felt as if one could reach up and touch them. She knew nothing about the curse. All Molly wanted was a quiet place to give birth. Her husband had died in a traffic accident on the highway, and the city had become unbearable, filled with pitying looks and questions she could no longer answer. A distant relative suggested Nong Kham, a remote, peaceful village, far from noise and crowds. There are no children there, the relative said, as if offering reassurance. The moment Molly stepped off the truck, several villagers noticed her belly and immediately looked away. No one greeted her, no one asked where she had come from. Their eyes followed her in silence, carrying something that was neither simple fear nor hostility, but a heavy, exhausted dread. The house where Molly stayed stood near the edge of the village. On her first night, she could not sleep. The air inside the room was unnaturally cold. Even with the windows shut, the child in her womb moved more than usual, its kicks sharp and restless, filling Molly with both comfort and unease. Then she heard the lullaby. Very faint. At first, Molly thought she was imagining it, but the melody was unfamiliar. Unlike any song she had ever known, it was low and drawn out, as if sung by a voice that had cried for too long. Molly placed a hand on her belly, whispering softly to calm her child. At that exact moment, a chill spread from her skin inward, as though another hand had been laid over hers from inside. That night, Molly dreamed. She stood inside a dark stilt house. The wooden floor was soaked and slippery. Before her stood a woman with her back turned, her belly grotesquely swollen. The woman rocked gently, humming the lullaby, her arms moving as if cradling a child. Molly tried to speak, but no sound came out. The woman slowly turned around. Her face was pale, her eyes sunk in deep into their sockets. But what jolted Molly awake in terror was not the woman's face. It was the woman's hands pressed flat against Molly's belly, close enough that Molly could feel each icy finger through her skin. "Let me borrow your child?" Molly bolted upright, gasping for air. On her stomach, red marks were clearly visible, shaped like fingerprints. From that night on, Molly's body began to change. The movements inside her womb no longer followed the familiar rhythm of a single child. The sensations became strange and uneven, as though there was more than one presence inside her. Molly began to feel heavier with each passing day, not from the growth of her belly, but from the sense that something else was settling in, quietly and patiently, claiming space. And in the long, sleepless nights that followed, Molly realized something that filled her with dread. When she placed her hand on her womb, it was no longer her own child responding. Chapter 9. The Shadow Beneath the Belly. At first, Molly told herself that everything could be explained. She was nearing her 8th month of pregnancy. Her body was exhausted, her mind was fragile after loss. Strange pains and distorted dreams, she reasoned, were nothing more than the result of stress. At least, that was what she tried to believe. But her body no longer listened. Every morning when Molly woke, her belly felt slightly heavier than the day before, not in the natural way of pregnancy, but with a deep, dragging weight that pulled her forward, as if something inside was anchoring itself more firmly with each passing night. The child no longer kicked with familiar rhythm. The movements were irregular, sudden. Sometimes a sharp push came from the left, followed by a slow tightening on the right, as though two different patterns of motion existed at once. One afternoon, while bathing, Molly saw something she would never forget. Under the dim light, the skin of her belly stretched thin, translucent enough for dark veins to show through. Then, slowly, a shape appeared beneath the surface. It was not the outline of a fetus. The shadow was longer, distorted, its head pressed unnaturally hard against the inner wall of her abdomen, creating a rigid bulge beneath the skin. Then it slid sideways, as if crawling, leaving behind a wave of icy sensation that spread across her stomach. Molly screamed and nearly collapsed in the bathing room. That evening, she sought out an old woman in the village, the only person willing to look directly at her belly. The woman did not touch her. She only stared, for a long time, before shaking her head. "There isn't just one," the woman said quietly, "and the other one does not belong to you." Molly asked what could be done. The woman turned away, unable to meet her eyes. "It's too late," she said. "It has already recognized your womb as shelter." From that night on, Molly no longer dared look at herself in the mirror for long. Because every time she looked down at her belly, she could see the faint impression of a small face pressing from the inside, not eyes or mouth. Just a hollow dark shape that opened and closed, as if learning how to breathe. In her half-sleep, Molly heard two heartbeats. One was familiar, weak, but steady. The other was slow and heavy, unlike the heartbeat of any living creature she had ever known. Outside, the lullaby drew closer each night. It no longer drifted through the village. It whispered right beside her ear, as if someone were bending down, listening carefully to the rhythm inside Molly's body. And for the first time, she understood a terrifying truth. Whatever was growing inside her was not waiting to be born. It was waiting to replace something. Chapter 10. The Abandoned Temple. The temple stood on the western edge of Nong Kham, where the forest began to swallow the narrow dirt path leading out of the village. No one spoke its name anymore. Sections of the roof had collapsed. Moss coated the steps. Inside the main hall, the Buddha statue was cracked, its once gentle face half lost in shadow, as though it had turned away from the living. Some said the temple had been abandoned long before Nong Chan died. Others whispered that it was the abandonment of the temple itself that allowed the curse to be born. As Molly's condition worsened, the villagers had no other choice. They brought her to the temple on a gray morning when the fog was so thick that they could barely see the person walking ahead of them. The moment Molly crossed the temple gate, she doubled over in pain. It was not labor. The pain was deeper, colder, as though something inside her was resisting. Her belly hardened, and for a brief, horrifying moment, Molly felt as if something within her was pushing back outward, not to be born, but to take control. The old monk who lived nearby was summoned. He had left the temple years ago, carrying its keys and a fear that never faded. The moment he looked at Molly, his face drained of color. "I warned you," he said hoarsely. "This thing is not new. It has been sealed before." He explained that many years earlier, another woman had died while pregnant in Nong Kham. The resentment had been so heavy that disaster spread through the village. Back then, the monks performed a sealing ritual, not to guide the spirit onward, but to imprison the souls of the mother and the unborn child, preventing them from attaching themselves to the living. That seal required constant upkeep, incense, chanting, and ritual care. But when the temple was abandoned, when no one lit incense and no one recited the sutras, the seal began to rot, just like the crumbling roof above them. The monk lowered his gaze to Molly's swollen belly, his prayer beads trembling in his hands. "A pregnant ghost does not need to break a seal," he said quietly. "It only needs a new womb." At that moment, a sound echoed from inside the main hall. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging across the cracked stone floor. Molly screamed as she felt her belly move in time with those steps, as though the thing inside her was answering a presence it recognized. The monk stumbled backward. "If the complete ritual is not performed," he said in a trembling voice, "then not only will the child inside her die, this entire village will lose the ability to give birth." But as he looked around the ruined temple, he understood the cruel truth. There were no longer enough people to perform the ritual as it once had been done. The temple bell was broken. The ancient sutras had decayed, and the spirit that had been sealed away had grown tired of waiting. From the darkness of the hall, the lullaby rose again, weaving itself together with the monk's broken chanting, two worlds overlapping. One of the living, and one of what had never been born. Chapter 11. The Night of the Blood Moon. The blood moon arrived without warning. It rose behind the eastern bamboo grove, dark red and swollen, like an infected eye staring down at Nong Kham. Its light did not illuminate, it stained everything it touched, soaking the village in the color of dried blood. The moment the moon reached its peak, the lullaby stopped. The silence that followed was crushing. It lasted only a few breaths, yet it felt long enough for everyone to hear their own heartbeat pounding inside their ears. Then, from the far end of the village, another sound emerged. Bare footsteps dragging across wet ground. Slow, even, unhurried. Villagers hid inside their homes, extinguishing their lamps, holding their breath. Through narrow cracks in doors and walls, they saw a woman's silhouette moving beneath the red moonlight. It was Nong Chan. She no longer resembled the memory of a corpse. Her body was soaked, her long hair clinging together and dripping water onto the earth. Her abdomen was split open, the tear running from her chest down to her thighs, revealing a hollow, black void inside. In her arms, she carried a child. It was not an ordinary newborn. Its skin was gray and wrinkled, its eyes tightly shut, its mouth open without crying. An umbilical cord trailed from its belly, coiled around the mother's arm, then dragging along the ground like a tether. With every step Nong Chan took, the earth beneath her feet darkened, wet with blood. She stopped in front of each house where a pregnant woman lived. She did not knock, she did not call out. She only stood there, lowering her head, and the child in her arms stirred. Inside those houses, women writhed in agony, their bellies convulsed violently. Some screamed until their voices broke. Others lost consciousness, blood soaked through wooden floors, leaking out to mix with the red moonlight outside. When Nong Chan reached the house where Molly lay, she paused longer than before. Molly was curled on the floor, sweat pouring from her body, both arms wrapped tightly around her abdomen. Her belly moved violently beneath her hands. The skin stretched so tight it seemed ready to tear. She heard a whisper, not from outside the house, but from deep within her own body. "It's time." The door opened by itself. Nong Chan stepped inside without making a sound. The blood moon illuminated her face clearly for the first time. It was the face of a woman who had cried until nothing remained, no rage, no hatred, only desperate longing. She placed the child gently on the floor. It did not cry. It only turned its head toward Molly, as though it had always known that this womb was where it belonged. Molly screamed as her body convulsed. Her abdomen tightened in unbearable waves of pain. She felt something inside her being pulled away, slowly and mercilessly, cold, slick, as though it were being dragged out of her flesh. Nong Chan knelt, trembling, and reached out. But at that exact moment, the temple bell rang. Not whole, not steady, but loud enough to tear through the night. The old monk stood outside, his hands shaking as he struck the cracked bell, his mouth chanting the final fragments of sutra he could still remember. Nong Chan lifted her head, her face twisted in agony. The night of the blood moon shuddered, and the entire village understood. By dawn, something would be born, or something would permanently take possession of the living. Chapter 12. The ritual to call the child's spirit. The temple bell fell silent, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. Nong Chan stood motionless in the courtyard, her long hair veiling her face. The child lay at her feet, neither crying nor moving. The blood moon cast a dark red sheen over everything, blurring the line between flesh and blood, between the living and the dead. The old monk knelt, pressing his palms together, his voice trembling but resolute. There is only one way left. The villagers were called out of their homes. No one dared refuse. They gathered in front of the abandoned temple, carrying candles, white ceremonial thread, bowls of blessed water, and an old earthen bowl, an object once used in rituals for children who died before birth. A rite that had not been performed in decades. Fimala appeared among them, walking slowly through the crowd. She looked at Nong Chan for a long time. There was no fear left in her eyes, only pity. The child was never given a name. She said, as long as it remains nameless, it will continue to wander. The ritual began in the temple courtyard. A circle was drawn on the ground using ash mixed with chicken blood, marking the boundary between the two realms. Molly was seated at its center, her body slick with cold sweat, her womb tightening in violent waves. A white thread was tied around her wrist and then around Fimala's, the thread of a substitute mother. Before Molly, the earthen bowl was placed on the ground. Inside lay the dried, blackened fetus, wrapped in red cloth. No one dared look at it for long. The monk began to chant. These were not sutras for release, but chants of acknowledgement, ancient verses meant to recognize a soul as having once existed. With each line spoken, the small, withered body in the bowl twitched faintly, as though responding to being called for the first time. Molly began to scream, not only from physical pain, but from the sensation of being torn apart from within. She felt two presences inside her struggling against each other, one trying to be born, the other trying to claim the space entirely. Amniotic fluid spilled onto the ground, mixing with blood and soaking into the earth. Fimala clenched her teeth and pressed her hands against Molly's belly. "Endure it," she whispered. "If you don't, it will never leave its mother." When the ritual reached its most critical moment, the monk stopped. "The child must be given a name," he said, "a name accepted by the entire village." No one spoke. To name the child was to accept responsibility, to admit that Nong Chan's death and the child's suffering were the village's doing. At last, Molly opened her eyes. Under the blood moon, she saw Nong Chan kneeling across from her, both hands extended, her expression pleading. There was no hatred left, only a mother begging to hear her child's name spoken. Molly drew a deep breath, summoning the last of her strength. She spoke the child's name. The moment the name echoed through the courtyard, the wind surged violently. The dried fetus in the bowl let out a cry, its first cry. Raw and piercing, tearing through the blood-soaked night. Nong Chan collapsed forward, covering her face as she sobbed. And inside Molly's womb, the darkness contracted, as if it had finally found where it belonged, or was preparing to leave forever. Chapter 13. The price of the ritual. The moment the child's name was spoken, the air in the temple courtyard changed. The blood moon began to fade, but something heavier replaced it, an invisible pressure pressing down on every chest, making it difficult to breathe. The wind no longer howled, instead, it spiraled low across the ground, carrying the mixed stench of damp earth, blood, and half-burned incense, the smell of rites never meant for the living. Molly screamed as a violent pain tore through her body. It was not the pain of normal childbirth. It came suddenly, deep and cold, as if something inside her was being ripped away from a place it had claimed. Her skin burned, then went numb, layer by layer, as her womb convulsed. Fimela knelt beside her, both hands slick with blood, refusing to let go, the white thread binding their wrists stretched tight, trembling violently, as if pulled from the other side of the world. "Don't let go," the old midwife whispered, her voice breaking. "If it snaps, it will return." Inside the ritual circle, the earthen bowl shook, the blackened fetus curled in on itself, emitting sharp cracking sounds, like bone splintering in fire. The red cloth fell away, revealing the small, twisted form beneath. Its umbilical cord jerked suddenly, as if searching for a way back to its mother's womb. Nong Chan screamed. Her cry was not the sound of a living woman, but the tearing howl of a soul forced to choose. She crawled toward the bowl, arms outstretched, but every time she touched the boundary of ash, her body was flung back, as though burned by an unseen flame. "My child." Her voice shattered into the night. The monk continued chanting, his voice hoarse, blood seeping from the corners of his mouth. The words were no longer prayers, but commands, forcing the child's spirit to leave a place that was never meant to be its home. Molly felt something slip free from inside her. It was not her own child. Whatever left her body was cold, slick, and unbearably heavy, dragging behind it a sensation of hollow terror. Molly screamed once more, then collapsed, her consciousness fading, the only sound left in her ears the cry of a child, no longer stifled, but full and unmistakably real. When Molly woke, she was lying on the cold ground. Her belly had flattened unnaturally fast, aching but lighter. Fimela sat slumped beside her, breathing shallowly, her gray hair soaked with sweat. Nearby, the old monk lay motionless, his eyes closed, his prayer beads shattered across the earth. Inside the earthen bowl, the blackened form was gone. Only the red cloth remained, along with a shallow indentation, as proof that something once denied birth had finally been released. Nong Chan knelt silently beside the broken ritual circle, her head bowed. Her womb was no longer empty. Yet her face was pale, her gaze hollow, as though part of her soul had been left behind somewhere no one could see. And everyone there understood. The ritual had succeeded, but the price had not yet been fully paid. Chapter 14, The First Cry. The cry began softly. It was not sharp or piercing like the wail heard beneath the blood moon, but weak and trembling, as if the being who made the sound had not yet learned how to draw breath in the world of the living. The villagers stood frozen. The sound did not come from the earthen bowl, nor did it rise from any house in the village. It came from the empty space between Nong Chan and Molly, where the ritual circle had been disturbed. Nong Chan slowly lifted her head. For the first time since she had appeared, she did not scream or weep. Her sunken eyes widened, filled with a fragile mixture of fear and disbelief. Her trembling hands reached forward, like a mother afraid that if she hesitated even for a moment, her child would vanish. On the cold ground, amid streaks of dried blood, a newborn lay there. It was small and frail, its skin bluish and thin, so fragile that the outline of bone could be seen beneath it. Yet its chest rose and fell, its mouth opened, releasing a faint cry, the first true cry of a being that had once been denied existence. The umbilical cord was gone. There was no longer any tether binding it to either realm. Nong Chan crawled forward and knelt beside the child. When her hands touched its skin, her body convulsed violently, as though her spirit were being torn in two. But the child did not fade. It did not grow cold. It was warm. Nong Chan gathered the child into her arms. At that instant, her form began to change. The gaping wound in her abdomen closed. Her hair dried and loosened. Her skin lost its translucence. The monstrous shape dissolved, revealing the fragile body of a woman worn thin by suffering, Nong Chan as she had been before her death. She lowered her head, pressing her forehead gently against the child's, tears falling onto its face. No one dared step closer. They understood that they were witnessing something never meant to be seen, the birth of life from resentment and grief. The crying gradually weakened, then stopped. The child's eyes closed, its breathing slowed, but its lips held a trace of peace, as if it had finally been allowed to sleep in its mother's arms. Nong Chan clutched her child tightly, saying nothing, as the blood moon faded and the sky returned to its familiar darkness. Both mother and child began to blur, dissolving like mist in the cold night air. All that remained on the ground was a lingering warmth that refused to disappear. Molly opened her eyes. Weakly, she lifted a hand to her belly. It still ached, but it was empty in the way a body feels after something has been returned to its rightful place. Tears streamed down her face, whether from pain or relief. She could not tell. Outside, for the first time in many years, the wind passed through Nong Kham without carrying a lullaby. Chapter 15. The Village That Was Forgiven. After the night of the blood moon, Nong Kham fell into an unfamiliar silence. The lullaby no longer drifted through the darkness. The metallic scent vanished from the wind. The blood that once seeped from beneath Nong Chan's stilt house dried, then disappeared, as if it had never existed. The house itself collapsed during a heavy rain, its rotten boards breaking apart and sinking into the rice fields. No one rebuilt it. No one wanted to remember. Molly survived. She remained in Nong Kham for some time, her body slow to recover. The child she had carried did not return, but later, doctors confirmed something that had never happened to any woman who left the village before. She could still bear children. The old monk passed away at dawn the following morning. He was found seated against a temple pillar, prayer beads broken in his hands, his expression peaceful, as though he had finally completed a task left unfinished for too long. The temple was repaired, not grand, not beautiful, but incense was never allowed to fade again. Phimala lived through one more rainy season. Before her death, she left a warning: if a woman in the village became pregnant, the child must be named while still in the womb. Life had to be acknowledged before it could be seen. The following year, a child was born in Nong Kham. Its cry rang out in the middle of the day, weak, but unmistakably real. The villagers gathered outside, no one daring to enter at first. Only when the new midwife placed the child into its mother's arms did the cry rise again, this time strong, human, and unmistakably alive. No disaster followed. Life slowly returned. The rice fields grew greener. The well water cleared. Children appeared once more, running through the village, filling it with sounds Nong Kham had believed it would never hear again. Yet no one ever claimed the curse was truly gone. On nights of heavy rain, when the wind swept low across the flooded fields, some villagers still heard a very soft lullaby, no longer filled with resentment or hunger, but distant and sorrowful, as if rising from the memory of the land itself. They believed it was Nong Chan, not calling for her child, but singing, gently, to let other children sleep in peace. And among the elders, one sentence was still whispered, never spoken aloud: there is no ghost more terrifying than a mother who dies before she ever gets to be one. Because what remains after hatred fades is not vengeance, but longing. Nong Kham was forgiven. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Some say the curse ended the night the child was finally named. Others believe it only learned how to sleep. Because on nights when the rain falls hard, and the wind moves slowly across the fields, a soft lullaby can still be heard. Not calling, not begging, only remembering. And the elders still warn. A ghost born from hatred may fade, but a ghost born from a mother's love never truly leaves.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.